Okay.
Sorry, I broke my cell phone.
So today I wanted to cover the skin and to look at that lab handout a little bit. So are there questions before we get started on that?
On the labs?
On anything? Yeah.
Okay. I was
Well, the
just
lab,
looking over.
yeah, we'll go over the lab in a little
Okay.
bit. Yeah. What I wanted to do is put up your PowerPoint from the skin. Okay, this is, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't share this with you, did I? There we go. So your skin is chapter 5 in your book, right? And I'm just going to I'm going to teach mostly just from this slide, really, because almost everything that we need is on this one slide. So up until now, we've been talking about cells and we talked about tissues. Now we're actually getting into organs, and the skin is the first organ or organ system we're talking about. The significance of that is that the skin is made up of multiple tissues, right? Organs are always made of multiple tissues, and the skin is no different. So this is the first time that we're going to see multiple tissues, which I know we just went over on Wednesday. We just started going over, but you'll actually see in practice that there are multiple tissue layers within this organ system. The skin itself is divided into an outer layer, the outermost layer, which is called the epidermis. Okay, these are over here on the left, and the layer underneath that, which is called the dermis. Okay, the dermis is where everything is, right? Everything that we're going to talk about, the glands, the nerves, the blood vessels, all of that stuff is in the dermis. The epidermis, epi means outer or above. The epidermis is the outermost layer of the skin. The epidermis is only stratified squamous epithelial cells. That's it. There are no blood vessels there. Even though the hairs go through the epidermis, the hairs are actually embedded in the dermis. Right? It's just layer and layer and layer of stratified squamous epithelial cells. That's all that the epidermis is. In the dermis, however, the dermis is made of connective tissue. If you remember, one of the things we said about connective tissue is that it never is on the edge of anything, right? There's always something outside of it. So the epidermis lines the outside of our skin. The dermis is connective tissue, and it is dense, irregular connective tissue. What that allows for is there's a lot of room for other stuff, right? There's a lot of room for blood vessels, for nerve cells, for the hair follicles, we'll see, for a muscle associated with each hair. So there's a lot of room for other things because the actual cells are pretty far apart in the dermis. Now, the dermis itself is divided into a papillary layer and a reticular layer. Papillary kind of implies these rounded finger-like projections, right? Papilla are these bumps. So the papillary layer is from these blood vessels, right? These red and blue blood vessels up to the epidermis, right? The dividing line between the epidermis and the dermis is this curvy line, this blue curved line. So everything above that blue curved line is epidermis. It's just stratified squamous epithelial cells. Everything below that line is dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay. Papillary layer is from the curved line down to the blood vessel, down to these two blood vessels that run straight across. And the reticular layer goes from those blood vessels all the way down to the bottom of the dermis. Now, the layer underneath the dermis is called subcutaneous, right? Underneath the skin, subcutaneous. Some books call it hypodermis, right? Hypo's below the dermis. It's in every book, it's shown on this diagram. And in every book, it's always listed as not a true layer of the skin. right? The skin is really the epidermis and the dermis. Whether you call it subcutaneous or hypodermis, it's a layer below the dermis that's not considered part of the skin. The subcutaneous layer is mostly adipose, right? All of these yellow cells are fat cells, they're adipose. We have a layer of fat underneath our skin. It's there for insulation, it's there for cushioning, right? So when you're looking at the skin, again, the epidermis is stratified squamous epithelial. The dermis is dense, irregular connective tissue, and the subcutaneous, or the hypodermis, is adipose tissue. Okay, so this is kind of your first introduction at the different tissues coming together to form an organ. Now, in the epidermis, like I said, there's nothing there. It's just cell layers. It's just there for protection. Everything is in the epidermis. Okay, and so over here on the accessory structures, all of these accessory structures are found in the dermis, including a hair, right? So the shaft of the hair pokes out through the skin, but the hair itself is embedded in the dermis, right? And this would be the hair follicle. It's embedded in the dermis. Why do you think mammals have hair?
For warm,
Warm, good.
For it to stand up and intimidate predators.
That's another, absolutely, that's another function that we'll get to in a second. Absolutely. So the primary reason we have hair is for warmth, right? To keep our body temperature warm. There are some places where it offers protection, like you think about your eyebrows or your eyelashes are going to protect, things from getting in your eyes. And then the fact that you can stand these hairs up to intimidate possible predators, right? So associated with each hair, I'm going to point to this follicle over here on the left, associated with each hair is a muscle, right? And here's the muscle on this one. The muscle is called the erector pili muscle. And when that muscle contracts, it makes the hair stand up. Now, there's a couple of reasons that muscle would contract. One is if you're cold, right? You go outside this time of year in the morning and you get goosebumps, right? You get all those little bumps. Right where your hairs are, it stands up. The reason that that's happening is because contracting muscles creates heat. So your body's trying to create some heat. Now, also by standing up the hairs, a lot of times an animal will look bigger than it truly is, right? Think about a cat. Even if you have a house cat, sometimes if they perceive a threat, right, their hair will stand up, all their hair around their neck will stand up. It makes them look like they're bigger, right? It's kind of like the equivalent of puffing out your chest. Think about a male lion, right? It has that big mane, so it looks a lot bigger than the female, but they're really about the same size. So a lot of times that hair is just to ward off potential predators, right? The hair standing up, making you look bigger than you actually are. That's why the hair will stand up on a cat or a dog a lot of times on their neck. If they feel threatened, it makes them look bigger. It makes them kind of feel tougher. Okay, so every single hair has this erector pili muscle associated with it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just gonna ask before we went too far, where does that muscle attach to? Is that the glandular layer? Is that attached to it?
So it's just attached to the hair, right? So all the muscle does is get shorter, but when this muscle gets shorter, it causes the hair to stand up.
Where's the other end of the muscle attached to?
It's just embedded in the connective tissue, right? The dermis is made of dense, irregular connective tissue. So it's just one end is fixed, right? And so if the muscle gets shorter, one end is fixed and one end's attached to a hair. When it gets shorter, it pulls the hair so it stands up. Okay. What else do we have in our dermis? We have glands, right? We have two major types of glands. What are those two major types of glands?
sweat gland
What is it?
for sweat.
For sweat, good, sweat glands, right? What are sweat glands there for? What do they do for us?
Do they help us to sweat or to remove the unwanted water or something?
When do you sweat?
Cool.
What makes you sweat?
To keep your body cool, like cool you down.
Right, to cool you down, right? When your body temperature gets too high, you start sweating to cool yourself off. Do you guys know how sweat cools you down? It's actually the evaporation of it that cools you down. So when you sweat, you produce this watery solution, right? And you get these drops of water, these beads of water on your skin. That doesn't cool you off. But when those beads of water turn to a gas, right? When they end up turning to a gas or a vapor in the air, that takes a lot of heat energy with it. And so the evaporation of the sweat cools you down. That's why sitting in front of a fan will cool you down, because the fan actually will cause those drops of water to evaporate. Right? If you say you go to the gym and you get back in your car to go home and you crank the air conditioner, you get cold really fast, and your t-shirt will actually be cold to touch, right? Where it's all wet, it'll get cold. And it's because that happens so quickly. Once the water evaporates, it takes so much heat with it. So we have these sweat glands all in our dermis. What's the other type of gland that we have?
What's it, the
Secretes
subcutis?
hormones, the endocrine.
Well, yeah, but I
Sorry.
mean, like in the dermis of our skin, what else do we have?
Says pool of sweat.
We have the sweat glands and we have these sebaceous glands, right?
Sebaceous.
Here's one
Sebaceous.
listed right here. Sebaceous
Yes.
glands secrete oil. Now, why would we secrete oil on the surface of our skin? What's your skin supposed to do?
Stay
Stretch,
moist.
like stay moist.
Why?
and
What does it do?
pliable.
How does your skin protects us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it protects you
Like-
by keeping things out, right? Keeping microorganisms out. So if your skin dries out, like a lot of times, when the weather turns colder, our skin gets dry, especially on our hands. What happens to your knuckles when your skin gets dry?
They chap. They
They
chafe,
chap, they crack, right?
Like that, yeah.
Well, if your skin has cracks in it, is it very good at protecting you anymore?
No.
Oh.
No.
No,
because
right?
it's bleeding.
That's
Open, yeah.
opportunities for bacteria to get in. So
Mhm.
that defeats the whole purpose. So the reason that we have these sebaceous glands and secrete oil is to try to keep our skin moist, to keep it from cracking. And the reason that we're doing that is to try to prevent entry of any of these microorganisms. Now, if you are looking at a diagram such as this, even if it's black and white, you can tell the difference between a sweat gland and a sebaceous gland. Sweat glands secrete their product right to the surface of your skin. So here's a sweat gland right here. If we follow that duct, it goes all the way to the surface of the skin. There's another one over here. The duct goes all the way to the surface of the skin. If we look at a sebaceous gland, it always secretes its product into a hair follicle, right? So this sebaceous gland secretes into this hair follicle. It reaches your skin right at the same place as your hair. There's another sebaceous gland associated with this hair follicle, right? So you can always tell the difference between a sweat gland and a sebaceous gland if you follow that duct, if you follow where it secretes the product. Okay. We have a lot of nerves in our dermis, right? We have pressure receptors, we have touch receptors. Notice the touch receptors are near the surface, right? We're not going to get into the different kinds of touch receptors, but they allow you to feel everything from a fly landing on you to somebody punching you, right? Those are two completely different things, and you can tell the difference, right? You're sensitive enough to even feel something like a fly landing on your hand or your arm. Deeper down, we have all these pressure receptors, right? So you can feel if somebody's pushing against your skin. Here's a pressure receptor down here. So we've got a lot of different nerve endings. We also have a lot of blood vessels in the skin, right? All of the blood vessels are in the dermis. They're all these red and blue lines, right? There's a layer of them here between, or that kind of separates the papillary layer from the reticular layer. There's a layer all the way down at the bottom of your dermis, and there are blood vessels going all throughout your skin. So if you cut yourself and you bleed, you've gone through the epidermis, right? You've actually gone down into the dermis, which isn't that hard. Even though the epidermis is stratified squamous cells, it's not really all that thick, right? You pretty much anytime you cut yourself or scrape yourself, oftentimes you bleed. Most of the time you bleed. So all of these accessory structures are found in the dermis, right? We've got the hairs, we've got the erector pili muscles, we've got sweat glands, we've got sebaceous glands, we've got nerve endings. All of that stuff is in the dermis. Again, the epidermis is only stratified squamous epithelial cells. So they are just epithelial cells right up against each other, and there are stacks of them, maybe 20 layers thick. And then below the dermis is what's called the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous layer. That is mostly fat. It's mostly adipose tissue. And that's there for cushioning. That's there for insulation, right? We have a layer of fat right underneath our skin. Now, the only other thing that I want to talk about is within this epidermis, right? From this curved line up to the surface of our skin, it's all just stratified squamous cells. But there are 5 different layers of squamous cells, right, that are described. And they are called strata, right? Strata just means layer. The layer that's at the top, right, the outermost layer is the stratum corneum. Underneath that, you have a thin layer called the stratum lucidum. Underneath that is the stratum granulosum. Underneath that's the stratum spinosum. And then the base layer is the stratum basal, right? So you can see here's that curved line. And just above that curved line, those are the stratum basal, right, the base ones. Below that curved line is the epidermis, the reticular layer of the epidermis, or I'm sorry, the reticular layer of the dermis. So you need to know these 5 layers. Now, there's one caveat. So they're all epithelial tissue. They're all squamous epithelial tissue. The cells that are at the bottom, so the stratum basal, are dividing very actively. And after they divide, they start to move, they start to migrate up towards the surface of the skin. And as they do, they push these other cells off. So every day you're shedding skin cells, right? Because new ones are moving up from the base layer, from the bottom, right? From this base layer down here, moving up to try to push these skin cells off. Now, we have thick skin and thin skin in our body. Who knows where we have thick skin? Where do you think we have thick skin?
Like our fingers?
Your fingers, the palms of your hands, right? So the palmar surface of your hands and the soles of your feet.
Oh, yeah.
That's the only place that you have thick skin on your body. Wherever you have thick skin, you have all 5 of these layers. Okay. However, the rest of your body is considered thin skin. So the majority of the skin on your body is thin. In thin skin, you only have 4 of these layers. The one that's missing is stratum lucidum. Okay. So this is the one that appears in thick skin only, the stratum lucidum, right? In any thin skin, you have the corneum, the granulosum, the spinosum, the basal. Okay. And basically, in the stratum basal, the ones that are dividing actively, you have melanocytes, right? And then as they move up a little bit further, you get some keratinocytes. So keratinocytes are a type of squamous epithelial cell. They produce keratin. And where have you heard of keratin before? Possibly.
For hair, nails, dead skin.
Yep, hair, nails, dead skin. Keratin is a protein fiber that these cells produce, and it covers the surface of your skin, and it just makes it tougher, right? It just kind of, it waterproofs it a little bit. It makes it more of a barrier to microorganisms. So a lot of hair care products and skincare products and nail care products promote keratin, right? They promote that layer to try to keep your nails stronger or your hair stronger. Right? Those are found way down here, but they, as they move up, they produce more and more keratin. The other cells that you see that are down here in this basal level are melanocytes. Melanocytes produce melanin. What is melanin?
Pigment.
What is it?
It's a pigment that
Mhm.
it's darker with more UV light
Yep,
rays.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a pigment, right? And so the whole point behind melanin is that it is somewhat protective against UV light, against UV damaging DNA. So we know that ultraviolet light damages DNA, causes mutations in DNA. One of the ways that your body protects itself is that it produces this pigment called melanin, and the pigment is protective against ultraviolet light. Doesn't mean it doesn't mean that it won't damage your skin at all, but it would take more to damage your skin if you have more melanin. Now we all have about the same number of melanocytes, but the amount of melanin that they produce is different, right? And a lot of that is genetic. This is one of those weird situations where it's partially genetic and partially due to your environment, right? If I'm in the sun, if I go on vacation to the Caribbean and I'm in the sun for a week, my skin will get darker. And it's because my melanocytes are exposed to more UV light, and therefore they produce more melanin to try to protect my skin, my cells from that ultraviolet light. Now, if I do that this time of year and then I come back here to Connecticut, that tan goes away in a week or two, because what happens is those cells take about a week or two to get from this bottom layer up to the top and to shed off. And the new cells underneath are not going to be producing as much melanin because I'm not going to be getting nearly as much UV light, right? So that's kind of the way that that works. So if you think about countries around the world that are closer to the equator, people in those countries are more exposed to ultraviolet light. They tend to be producing more melanin, right? So that's kind of where the skin color comes in, right? Somebody from Norway is not going to produce a lot of melanin because they're not exposed to a lot of ultraviolet light, whereas somebody from Ecuador is, right? So there's kind of this genetic component that gets passed on from your mom and dad, and then there's also an environmental component to it. That's about it for the skin, right? There's not, I mean, these slides, they go through a lot of the things that I said in a little more detail, but that's really about it. You can kind of summarize the skin in this slide and then that slide that just talks about the different layers.
Can you go back to that one where it shows more melanin? I think it was,
This one?
nope. Actually, yeah, let me see that one too. I want to take a picture. I was having a conversation with somebody who has sunspots on their head, and I was like,
Oh.
you might have an
Oh.
issue. Oh, go back. Hold on. Let me take a picture.
This one?
There we go. Yep. And then there's another one where it's someone's actual skin with
Yeah,
a
this
bump in
one.
it. But there you go. Let me get that.
Melanoma.
Yep. That might be what's going on with her. All right, cool.
So yeah, in general, if somebody has a dark spot and the edges are irregular, right? They're kind of like wavy edges, and it changes over time, right? 6 months later, it looks different. It's a different shape or it's a little bigger. Then you really need to, go see a doctor. Melanoma is common. It's really common that people end up with melanomas just because, we're exposed to the sunlight and we don't all take the precautions that we should maybe. So I know a number of people that have had melanomas and had to go get them surgically removed, and they're fine, right? They're They don't have any other issues. It's just that they can't be in the sun. They have to cover up. So that's usually the sign of something going wrong, is that it changes shape or size over time.
Is that popular for male people? To get
Mail
that?
carriers? Is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, she's a mail carrier, and she's like,
I mean,
showed me her forehead. This is my kid's mom, and she's got real dark spots like that. I'm like, oh, geez, you should get that looked at.
yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Buy a hat.
I suppose if she doesn't wear a hat, you know what I mean? If she delivers the mail on foot every day and doesn't wear a hat, then I suppose that could be more common.
I want to
Sure.
buy her one of those headbands like the derm doctor has. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah, one of those.
or just a
Yep.
big hat, like a sombrero.
Yeah, she has one of those. It looks silly.
Right. You know?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's pretty much it for the skin. Now, what I did for the lab was I did post an assignment here. It's just a Word document. Just opening that up,
Where is?
right? And it goes through, it starts with the tissue types. So it names the tissue type, and you have to give me an example of a location where you would find that and a function of it, right? So like simple squamous, we would find in the lungs, and the function is to allow oxygen to diffuse across that layer, right? And then it gets into a place where you need to draw them. Okay, draw the epithelial tissues. Again, you only need to draw these 5 that are listed, so you don't need to draw all 8. And drawing the connective tissues. They don't have to be the best drawings in the world, but just so that you can recognize them, so that I know that you can look at 2 different slides and know the difference, right? And see the difference. Part 2 is all about the skin. So draw a picture of the skin, kind of like that first picture that I put up that showed the dermis and the epidermis, right? And the hypodermis, which is the same as the subcutaneous layer. Label the corneum layer, where keratinization takes place, in the basal layer of the epidermis. And then for each of these layers, the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis, you're going to tell me what type of tissue is there and what the functions are, right? And then, again, you could choose 2 tissue types and describe symptoms of an autoimmune disease that attacks those tissues. If this is an identified disease, you can name the disease. So this can just be hypothetical, right? It doesn't have to be a real thing. I'm actually going to say, I'm going to cross out number 2. Describe the metabolic pathway for vitamin D synthesis and the role of it in calcium absorption, because you do need, your skin needs to be exposed to sunlight for vitamin D synthesis. But then the third one you definitely need to do, explain what would happen when you get a suntan, right? What do the melanocytes do? Why does the suntan go away? Does this happen to people with both light and dark colored skin? That kind of thing.
So you said number 2, we skip number 2?
Skip number 2. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll edit that out, and then I'll re-upload the edited version of it. Right after we get off this call, I will edit number 2 out so that there'll only be 2 questions here instead of 3.
Okay. And this is due on Thursday?
This is not due until Friday, October 8th. So next Friday, right? So you have a week to do that. So what I'm going to do, right? This is your Pearson home. And if you go to all assignments on Pearson, so make sure everybody's on the same page. If we go to all assignments on Pearson, you guys out of the way. Here we are, Friday the 1st. There's a quiz due Tuesday night, right? The quiz on the tissue and the skin is due Tuesday night. The homework is not due until Friday. I'm also going to make the test available today, and the test will be due on Friday. So on Friday the 8th, You have 2 homework assignments due, the test due, and the lab assignment due. That's 4 things due. I would recommend doing the homework assignments before the test. So even though they're not due until the same day, I would try to get through these homework assignments if you haven't already, because they're going to give you a lot of questions that'll be similar to the test.
So
We got the
on fifth,
lab. Go ahead.
on fifth, we have tissue and these are quizzes, eh?
This is a
On-
quiz. This
by
is just a
Tuesday.
quiz. Yep.
Uh,
Yeah.
On Tuesday is your quiz. On Friday, you have 4 things due: 2 homework assignments, a lab assignment, and the test. Okay, and the test will be on Moodle. Again, I'll make that available right after we get off this call. It's up there. I just have to make it available, look over it, and make it available for you, right? The exam 2 will be right here underneath your lab 4 work. Questions about that stuff?
Not at the moment.
All right.
Mhm.
So you said for this, actually for the skin one, the one that you just went over.
Mhm.
We could use that as like the diagram for the homework.
This one?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's the one we can use on the homework for the diagram, and we just have to label what you're asking.
Yep, you can use that
Okay.
one, or it might be good to use the, because it is asking where the different cells are within the epidermis. This one is good too, the layers of the epidermis, right? Because it
Okay.
does ask you. Well, yeah, you're gonna have to use the first one because it asks you to label the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. But then on the epidermis, you want to label which layer is the corneum layer, and you have to label where keratinization takes place. And that information is found on this slide, right? That's where you can find where the stratum corneum is, and you can find where keratinization takes place.
I have a question. How thick is the stratum lucidum in thick skin? And how
It's-
does that make a difference in how thick it is?
It's thin. So that's a good question. So let me make this bigger.
Mhm.
So the real difference between thick skin and thin skin. Thick skin has the stratum lucidum, thin does not. That's not what makes the skin thick or thin, right? The stratum lucidum is a really thin layer. What makes the difference is the thickness of this stratum corneum.
That's what I thought.
So
Okay.
in thick skin, the stratum corneum is really thick. The outermost
Oh.
layer, which has a lot of dead skin cells, is really thick.
Mm-hmm.
Palms of your hands, soles of your feet. In thin skin, the stratum corneum might only be, half as thick, right? It might only be 10 layers thick instead of 50 layers. It might only be to here, right? So the real difference between thick and thin skin is the thickness of the stratum corneum. So even though thin skin does not have the stratum lucidum, that's not what makes it thin. That's a good question. I didn't point that out.
That's okay.
Other questions?
No, just, I'm not a very good artist, so my drawings will look funny.
That's fine. I don't mind that at all. And if you,
Oh,
if you're good at using the computer and you want to draw it on the computer, that's fine. If you want to print it out and draw it by hand and take a picture of it, that's fine. That works fine too. And just upload the picture.
Don't feel bad. Look at this drawing.
There you go.
Terrible.
If you drew it on a notebook page or whatever, that's fine too. You could just, take pictures of that and upload that. That works.
I tried so far the little cells.
Oh, there you go. Good.
Oh, there
that's
you go.
that's the point, is that you want to be able to recognize the shape and what it would look like under a microscope, right? That's what I want to be able to see, is that you can understand those different shapes and those different amounts of cells.
Yeah, I can't draw.
That's fine.
It skipped
have-
a generation. Try my best, though.
For the pseudostratified epithelial cells, are they all connected to the basement membrane?
They are all connected to the basement membrane. They do not all reach the apical layer. They don't all reach the top, the free edge. But they are all connected to the basement layer.
Connected to base. And what was the other part? They all don't reach the apical surface?
Right. They don't all reach the apical surface. There are some that only go maybe like halfway up.
So for like the drawing here, if I wanted to do it on a separate sheet of paper,
Mhm.
I can do that and just label what it is and hand that in with the work.
Yep, absolutely. You should be able to upload up to like 20 documents on Moodle. It shouldn't give you a problem. Let me know if it does, because if it does, I don't have it set right, but it should let you upload multiple pages.
Okay, I just didn't know if you wanted it all on the same thing, because some of the stuff
No.
I might end up doing on a separate sheet, like that skin cell thing we have to draw. I might just do that on a separate sheet.
Yeah.
And just kind of do it that way.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine.
All
Yeah.
right. So,
Gotta pull out my Crayola crayons.
There you go. Hey, one of the best things for A&P in general is the coloring book, right? I don't know if any of you guys have found a coloring. There are a bunch of coloring books that are on Amazon. They're like $10, and they're really good, especially for things like the bones and the muscles. You know, for remembering where those are, for remembering where different organs are. They're really useful.
you have a particular one that you would recommend?
I do not. No, I don't. But just in general, you know, there's something that's useful that a lot of students from different A&P classes have said that's really helpful, especially with the bones and the muscles,
You mean
because there are a
this?
lot of them. Yep, exactly.
Yeah,
So it
I
just
got
tends to
one.
stick in your mind better when when you're actually coloring in different parts. And
Yeah, I got this one I bought on Amazon.
yep,
Oh, cool. Thank you. I'm gonna get it right. Human anatomy card.
Now that you mentioned that, I forgot I had it.
there you go. So this is the time in the class when you're going to start using it. Once we get past the skin, we get to the bones and the muscles, and there's a lot to go through, you know.
I found it for $5. I have one question too. What is the difference between this anatomy class and the anatomy they go through in medical school?
That's a 2-semester anatomy course, and so it goes into a lot more detail. So when I
Gotcha.
teach anatomy, like for nursing majors and stuff, for bachelor's in nursing or master's in nursing, they're taking a 2-semester anatomy and physiology course. So we're going over everything in 1 semester, and we
Like
are
this?
not going in as much depth on anything.
This goes in like a lot of detail. It's ridiculous. And I figured
Yeah.
this was like nursing for bachelors or those anatomy classes in medical school.
For med school, yeah. So that's the
I've
difference. I
never
mean,
seen it in that.
anatomy is anatomy, right? It doesn't really change. It's just the depth that you're going to go into it in. That's all.
Right, right, okay.
All right. Any other questions?
No, not that I can think of it. Got a lot of stuff to start today.
Yeah, exactly. But at least you have, I feel like I'm giving you guys time to do it. So that's a good thing. I'll send out an email right after I get off this call to make sure everybody's kind of on the same page with the assignments that are coming up, so that everybody's keeping up with them. We'll just go from there.
And you
Right.
said you're opening up the quiz and the test too?
I'm opening up the test. The quiz should be there in mastering. You should be able
Okay.
to see the quiz already. But yeah, I'll open up the test as well. I just want to make
Yeah,
sure
that's
it's
easy.
Well, the
The
settings are
only thing
right.
I can't get on at work is the masters. For some reason, I can't load that up on my computer at work, so I can't do that, but.
It could be that pop-ups are blocked.
Yeah, because it's a hospital, so they block up a lot of things,
Yeah.
but I can get on my Greenfield site and I can
You
do
can
that
the
stuff,
Moodle
but I
stuff.
can't get onto masters. I was gonna try doing stuff last night, but
Yeah. So if
But-
there's a way to disable the pop-up blocker, sometimes I've had to do that. Like some students' computers are set like that and they have to go in and actually change the settings to allow pop-ups from the Pearson site. I don't know if you're allowed to do that. I don't know if there's like a firewall. Like, I don't know if you need to be an administrator on the network at the hospital where you work to do that. But if you can do that, try it. You know, that a lot of times that resolves the issue.
yeah. But I'll work on that at home.
Okay,
The other stuff I can do at work.
okay.
I have one more, it might be an advising question, but
Sure.
just to save me from that, is this book to apply for the RN program? And does this class, count towards the RN program if you don't yet have the bio 151 and the general chemistry course?
So I think the book to study for the TEAS test, I think that's the right book. As I think this class is for the LPN program. And
That's
my
what I thought.
understanding is, was it 215 and 216 are for the RN, but I
Yeah,
could be wrong. I think the RN program, you need the 2 semesters of A&P. I think this would count as maybe your bio for the RN program or something, if there's a bio prereq, which I'm not sure about how Greenfield Community College does it. But I think it's 215 and 216 are the A&P 1 and A&P 2 classes for the RN
Okay.
program.
yeah, I think the RN, you need A&P 1 and 2. I'm only doing LPN, so I only need.
Yeah, I
A&P
don't-
1.
Mm-hmm, gotcha. Yeah, if I can get a job in the hospital, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, there is a bigger list of requirements for the RN program.
I thought
Especially
so,
for like
yeah.
math, A&P, anatomy 102, anatomy 1 and 2, and then, or it's a major biology, if I remember.
Yeah.
I looked
Yeah, I
at it
think-
real quick, but I'm not doing RN, so.
I think the only thing I'd be missing